Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing.
And I'm Bobby Metcalf.
And we're here today because a while ago we did a little tutorial on picking fabric for your quilt.
A long while ago. I had a beard.
You did have a beard.
Yeah, we did one where it was like, I really like to pattern ultraviolet and how we picked fabric to match that. If you had a pattern you liked and you couldn't buy the exact fabric. And then we also did, if you have fabric you really like, how to find a pattern to match that. And I had really liked The Fae by Rae Ritchie from Dear Stella. Came out last year. And we matched the patterns. We figured out that we were going to do Vintage Revisited with it. And now after several months, I finally have gotten the quilt top pieced. It's my first ever quilt top done. I had done 2 table runners before that. And it took me, I don't know, from start to finish, 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
You did a full-size quilt though, right?
I did do it. It was a
yes.
lap size, yeah.
I would not at all feel like that took you a long time because you're used to seeing me do a quilt from start to finish in a week, and that's not normal.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it.
I've been doing it a bit.
It's insane.
That's why I've been doing it a bit, and then I normally don't sleep all that much the stash week.
Yeah.
And I often will quilt until in the wee hours.
So we'll show the flashback of facial haired me and talking about this part of the fabric choosing process, the pattern choosing process, and then we'll come back and show off the finished quilt top. I won't say finished product because it still has to be quilted and bound. But
he's going to use a long arm, and I think we were talked about wavy lines because I think you can manage that.
I know. I'm just going to.
Yeah, it's like smoother motions, kind of back and forth and to the side. Am I going to have the same conversation I had with Angela that you should not hear the machine go vroom? It should just be steady.
I'm like a 5-year-old in terms of quilting ability, so yes.
This is not true. I have video of Angela quilting at 5. You're doing better.
Well, we'll see about that.
Although I think right now you might be about as good as, well, no, she couldn't do that, what you did. But she does have a pretty good 1/4-inch seam at 9 years old.
I'm better than a 9-year-old.
You're better than a 9-year-old. Who's been sewing since she was 5 and is the daughter of a quilting instructor. So, that's something to be said for.
So, all right, well, let's get to the initial part, and then we'll get into the show and tell after that.
All right, so we have The Fae, which is a collection you really liked, and you grabbed before you knew what you were doing at all. I don't think you'd sewn anything yet.
I hadn't sewn a thing. I really like dark forest greens, so that really stood out to me. I like the foxes. It was just something that we were getting very low on, and I figured I needed to grab a bundle before it was gone, and I'd figure out what to do with it, at some point in my life.
All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this, and we're going to separate it into color values, and then we're going to take a look at the patterns and find one that you can do as a beginner and that will work for the color value of this collection. So what we're going to do first is separate it into our light, mediums, and darks. So we've got medium there. And this one is one where it's it can go either way because it's definitely a medium when you put it against the lights. But once we get to these darker greens, it looks more like a medium. So it really kind of depends on what it's next to, and sometimes that matters. Like if we had a black with this, then maybe we could consider that to be even a medium. So medium is very relative in terms of what we're using. But this, I think, is a good mix of it. So we have 3 light, 3 medium, and 5 dark to work with. And so 12 total fat quarters. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through all of our paper patterns and all of our patterns in Fat Quarter Workshop and Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts to see what will work for. First, let's just go for 12 fat quarters, and then we will take a peek at what will work for the color values.
Okay, and my skill level.
And your skill level. So first, let's get rid of anything that has a triangle in it.
So.
And that's a no. Also no.
That's a no.
Nope, not yet. This one is strip piecing, and we just kind of cut it on a 45-degree angle first. So I would call this confident beginner. Do you think you're a confident beginner yet?
I don't think I'm a confident anything yet.
Okay. So. It's strip piecing, maybe. That you could definitely do. Also no. This could absolutely work for color values because we have lighter ones in the center, but I think skill-wise, we're not there yet. I think this is on your bucket list, but not right now.
Yeah.
Same with the no. This is definitely beginner friendly. Beginner friendly. This, even though it's on the diagonal, it is strip piece, so that one is beginner friendly. Same with this one.
That one I know, as since you said it's basically 4 large prints, and
It is.
And you know, I don't necessarily want a fussy cut, but I also don't want to lose, you know, the foxes and everything. So that, I mean, I know that is one potentially that
that could potentially work. This, we talked about this one where like the colors are really similar. And sometimes when people see like they can't get the fabric anymore, they look for things that will look like it. Where you still have your greens, you have some teals, and you have some peaches. So sometimes people can't see beyond the color, like switching the color out totally. And in that case, this could be one where you're like, oh, this is the one I'm going to do.
And we'll talk more about when you see a color you really like, trying to
make it work. And we'll do that in the next section.
Yeah.
The strip piece, kind of more triangles. Strip piece, more triangles. Triangles. Here's a triangle masterclass. My 8-year-old told me yesterday she wants me to give her a personal triangle masterclass.
All right.
We'll see how that goes. Maybe you two can get it together. And triangle, so that's a no. All right, so let's also go through to the title page. So for these two, I think we're looking at our Rainbow Bargello and Garden Plot. This one is strip piece, but it takes 24 fat quarters, which we do not have. So we're going to have to look at one of those two.
Here's your other book.
And let's check this one. This is the second fat quarter book to come out. This one, I think Dot Dash is in the running, as well as Strata. Those both have no triangles in them and could potentially work for what we're doing today. All right, let's go ahead and check this out first. Let's look at our color values, or the number of ones in there, and then color values. Okay, so the twin for this one takes 12. So this one's doable, but you are gonna run into some issues with this really light print. Because in this one, all the fat quarters are touching the background. So you either are going to have to go bright white, like we did with this quilt, or you're going to have to go with kind of a really medium gray. So something that's like halfway in between this and the bright white. So like the shade of that fox's paw would
or like
be perfect.
Maybe the shade of one of the mushrooms.
Yeah, something like that too. You even could do like a really light peach. Like the color of our butterfly wing, that could be a possibility. And when you've got kids, pets, people who spill things at home, sometimes that's better than bright white. Okay, so Strata, you could make the lap quilt. That one's 9 fat quarters. So for that one, there's a couple things you could do. You could use them all and just have leftovers. Or you could pull out your light prints and then you're not limited on what you can do with your backing. Or you could pull out some of these like middle prints and still have a really light background. But in this one, I feel like the punch of it is that everything contrasts so well with that background. Even though that's not a light background, it's definitely a medium scale background. Everything contrasts so well with it that that's what makes that design pop. So the number works. I don't think the color value works for this one.
Okay.
All right, so here's our modern Rainbow Bargello. This one is a lot bigger. It uses 12 exactly for the throw. And there's lots of options you could do for this, but you would be able to use every single one and you don't have to worry about a background.
So this is the thing that my brain has trouble looking at. Because I look at this quilt and I see the rainbow. I see the Roy G. Biv outline where it's like, okay, how is that going to look when I do it with, you know, this collection, which is greens through whites.
So we can go light to dark with that and just have it fade. Or we could put more of our colors together. Like this one fits a little better with our gray, and these fit a little better with the peaches here. And then this, you can see kind of this shade in some of the mushrooms. So that's going to work a little bit better transitioning in. You could also kind of alternate things too. Like we have, maybe we want to have all these stand out more. So this one works really well with pulling out that teal and the mushroom and the fairy's dress. So maybe we want to put this one next to here. And then we could put a light in maybe. And then we could go back and get in maybe another dark or two. Maybe go to another dark one there and then get in another medium. Although they both look really similar, so maybe let's go with this one, so that way we don't have two prints right next to each other. And then we can get, the peach really looks good with that fox. So then we can put in here. And then we kind of are running out of here. So this way the eye is drawn kind of more through. We're going to have two green together here, and then also where these match up. But the eye is going to get transformed a lot more this way, and it's just going to go up and down, and your eye isn't going to be drawn to all one spot. Like when you overheard me helping my daughter lay out a quilt, and I was trying to suggest to her, rather stubborn 8-year-old self, that maybe we don't want to have all of our black in one area, and we don't want to have all of our light in another area, because your eye just, I have actually a picture of how it looks, so you guys can see it too, because she stuck to her guts. She kept all the black together, and I was like, okay, it's your quilt. It is what it is. You'll learn as you go. But this way, your eye is going to move more around the quilt, and it's going to go up and down with the different color values and look a little better.
So that's the thing. I mean, you just have to, your mind has to not be, because you say there are rules, and my mind is, oh, those rules meant to be broken. But there's a difference between breaking the rules and being flexible with the rules. I mean, you look at a quilt like this, and you see, okay, you've got this clear color scheme, where it's here, you've got some greens together, and you've got just seeing how it kind of works together.
I don't always do that. This quilt that you like so much, interlocking triangles. This is also rainbow. I could have done it in rainbow, but I decided I didn't want to do that for this quilt because I didn't want it to be going from rainbow going back and forth. I wanted to mix it up. So when I laid the fabrics out for this one, I made sure that each one contrasted. So for this one, I was working a lot with color wheel. So like I have an orange next to a blue because they're opposite on the color wheel. That's why they look good. And same with blue and yellow. They're pretty much opposite. And this one reads purple and it's next to green. And so we still do have some that are next to each other on the color wheel. We have a purple and a blue, but they stand out enough to be able to make that work. Because I wanted each one of these to stand out on its own and be really clear that we had our color going from one to another. Whereas in this quilt, I wanted it to look like a true rainbow where it was going up the way it was set with that bargello. So it kind of looked like it was arching over like an actual rainbow. So yeah, there are rules. There's ways that color looks good, but you also have to think, how is the eye moving around the quilt? Is it stuck in any one place? Because I have too much of the same thing next to each other. Or what am I going for? Do I want it to meld one into another so then it doesn't matter that I have a really like red next to a really like ruddy pink? Or do I want it to all stand out like this one? It seems easy for you. I mean, I've done over 100. You're doing hundreds of patterns. Yeah. You're doing a new stashing pattern every month. How tough is it for you to just kind of see a line of fabric and say, ooh, I think I could do this with this, I could do that with that. You've been able to make the fabric really shine, and you're being creative and you're coming with your own patterns. I mean, how difficult is that for you to do? So I don't always do the best job with it. My best time when I do it is when I have it in my hands. And I'll look at it, and then I will do something completely else for a couple of days. And it will just percolate in my subconscious, and then I will come up with something that will go with it. And when I don't have that, that's when I have quilts that I don't love the way that they turn out. Where's undulation? That one I did not love how it turned out because we had, it shipped in 2 parts to us, and so they shipped literally half of the bolts, but they were like all the same SKUs, so we were missing like 5 of the bolts or something. It was a big number. And so I started going on it and started cutting and had designed everything. And then when it got there, there were so many light value prints that my log cabin didn't work the way I thought it would. And so what I ended up doing was treating the quilting differently, so that way the half of the log cabin strips would be separated by the texture of the quilting in addition to the design of the quilt block. But I don't think that pattern lived its best life in the fabric that we used. I think it would live its best life in something with greater contrast with the background. And you're always keeping an eye out for fabric that would work
for a pattern you've already done. I mean, I know you've done a star sign. We've just redid frequency in two different colors.
Actually, the rainbow was Adam's idea. He's been trying to get me to do that for a very long time.
How much are you on the lookout for fabric and ways to make it work and reuse it or reuse a pattern for a fabric?
Well, when I meet with reps, if I see something that I think would work really well and something that we've done originally, either it has the same look of that fabric, like frequency, anytime I see a black and white, we usually redo a frequency. Or star sign, when I saw it in that celestial type line, to where it would fit with that theme of the quilt too, with the 3 different size stars and log cabin, and there was so much dark in it. Then I will look and I'll be like, okay, can we make this work? How many fat quarters do I need to make this happen? So basically, as I'm meeting with reps, they come with these big boards of fabric. Sometimes they have actual fabric, and I'm able to look at it and be like, oh, that would be perfect for blah, blah, blah. Or like ladies chain. Free Spirit reached out to me before the fabric was even printed to show me what was going on in Shell Rummel's next collection that was coming up. Like, can you do anything for this? So companies will reach out sometimes and say, do you have anything for this? And I'll say, yeah, I think it'll work good with this pattern. And we make it digitally. And in that one, we also made it physically, because I will always make a Shell Rummel quilt.
How much of that comes with practice, just having done this for...
I think some of it is practice and some of it is intuition. I always use the example of like when you're redesigning your kitchen, you usually get a designer to help you with that, because not everybody can look at a countertop sample and a paint chip and flooring and the cabinets and be able to see what it's going to look like all together and know that's going to look good. A lot of us need like the HGTV rendering in order to be like, yeah, that's it. And so I can see it without needing the rendering, but a lot of people need the rendering. So that's why we do the digital quilts. And sometimes we actually make it. Like when we redid Frequency the last time around, people really loved the black and white because they could see how it like went back to the previous version that we did, the original. But the rainbow did not go so well. But what happened when Vicki brought in the sample and I told you and Courtney that it was available?
It looks incredible.
They went running to go see it. They were so excited because it looks so good. But it's something that sometimes is hard to see online.
Tangent aside, so we've got these patterns.
Yes, we have some patterns. Alrighty, so let's flip them over and see what we can do with 12 fat quarters.
All right, so that I could do.
That's a lap. So you would have one action. When it's like this, a lot of times like for Stash Miss Stephanie, we won't need all 15 fat quarters to make it, but I still cut all of them up. And I will use them and just have some left over. So you could still use all of them, or you could pull one.
Vintage Revisited could also do a lap.
Yep, that's 11. So that
Grid
works.
work, you could do all 12.
Yep. So this is one where you're going to have to get creative with that background, because every single fabric is going to touch it. So you need to make sure that it's going to contrast with all of them.
All the pretties.
12. So same thing, where you got to get creative with the background.
And I know that one especially you
This
designed
is
so you could
also
show off some big prints.
a creative background one, yeah.
Let's see, we've got Ladies Chain, which you could do at 12 with lap.
Yep, also creative with your background.
Rainstorm, you need 20, so that one's
that's
out.
out.
And then Lattice, I could do a lap with 9.
Yeah, so you could do that. This one, the easiest thing to do is to go with a nice cream background and pull these. But you wouldn't have to just pull these. You could pull some other fabrics that you didn't like as much. Or again, you could use them all and just have some left over later when you're done. And so it's all up to you. Like there are some people who like hate having anything left over. They feel like that's been a waste of money. To me, I don't feel that way. I like to have all of it in there, and if I have some extra, then I'll put it in our scrap bin here at the shop, and someone else from our team will do something fun with that.
Yeah, I can guarantee you if I have a 2x6 square left over, I am not going to be ever use that, so it'll be going into the scrap bin.
You should see some of the stuff that Vicki has made just from scrap bins. Same with Mary. They love that kind of stuff.
They are much more experienced quilters than I am.
They are. They've been doing it maybe as long as the two of us have been living or longer.
Now, is this a cream background or is it a bleached white background?
So that's tricky. So there's 2 ways that it's printed on there. So you either have a bleached white background, and then it looks best with bleached white backing or background fabric. And then there also are natural backgrounds that are printed on top, and then they look best with sort of those cream ivory. Now this one is a tricky one because you can't tell it on this one. This one just looks nice and cream. But if we look at the selvage, this one is not the one with the printed selvage edge, so we need to find one that has a printed selvage edge. So they're tricking you on this one. Learn this from Lee Chapel Monroe. This is a bleached white selvage edge, which means they have printed a cream color on top of bleached white. So it's a little tricky, but it also shows you why this looks good. Like this doesn't look like it really belongs to me sometimes. And that's why we end up seeing things like this. Like it goes together, the grays tie it in, that's why it works. And this is also why the chest of the fox is gonna pop. So it really just depends on what you choose. Like if you choose a more cream background, then your foxes and your butterflies are gonna pop. And also like these, anywhere where you have the peaches. If you choose white, then prints like this are gonna pop, your foxes, your fairy dresses. It just depends on what you pick, on what will show off there.
Okay. What if you have gray walls? You know, or should you quilt with what your room looks like in mind?
So this is what I've done with my bedroom. I like teal. You've been in my house. There's a lot of teal everywhere. I'm working on getting rid of all of the earth tones that were popular when we first moved in and we painted the house the first go around. And we're going to all really cool grayscales. Like there's cool grays and warm grays. So we're doing cool gray and white throughout everything. I have really deep teal dresser that I painted. It was my grandmother's. And so I'm kind of limited by that only because what I have on my bed every day is a white, kind of creamy, but mostly white, just plain quilted throw that I got from Target. I like to have that on there because I got dogs, they jump on there, and kids get stuff on there. And so that I can wash all the time. I don't worry about it. And then what I do at the foot of the bed is I put like whatever quilt I want there. That way I don't have to worry about making sure I've got a king size quilt and I can change it up pretty regularly without having to worry so much about decor. So like over the weekend I had Subway folded neatly on the foot of the bed. And do I have any yellow in my bedroom? No, I don't. Or brown. But there was enough of that grayscale to where it looked good where it was. I've seen a lot of designers, once I talked with Allison Glass, this is many years ago, she may have turned things around a lot. I think she's got a lot of white, same with Tula, because then you can pull out as much color as you want and it'll look good. A lot of people like to have seasonal type things because then they can put out their spring quilt. Or their winter quilt, and it doesn't have to match perfectly as long as the style works with their home. If you have gray walls and you make a gray quilt and you have cool gray walls and you make more of a brown gray quilt, it's going to look weird. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. Are you quilting to match all your decor, or are you quilting for your heart and soul because you love that fabric? Which is it?
Well, there's a difference.
Yeah. Or are you quilting for somebody else and you're not going to keep it?
Yeah.
It just depends. Like this quilt, I could totally make work in my room because there's a lot of teal in it. This one would look maybe a little weird in my room, but would look fine in my kids'. At this point, we have painted to sell it at some point, and so it's gray, and there's not a lot of color in there. And so, I chose a gray couch specifically for that as well, because then I can put whatever on it and it looks fine. All right, in an effort to not make this super, super long, were there any of the quilts in the books that you really had your heart set on?
Probably not.
Okay, so all of these would work with the number of fat quarters that you have. What you kind of have to keep in mind is how it's going to be touching the outside of the fabric. So ones like Ladies Chain and all the pretties and grid work, every fabric is going to be touching your background. And in a lot of these traditionally screen printed lines, you end up with a lot of neutrals like these, because the way that fabric manufacturers keep costs down is by limiting the number of screens they have to produce. That's a really expensive part. So when we look at the butterflies, for example, that's from the same screen print. So they will be able to create one screen for every color that's in here. And prints like this really help reduce the cost of the line because you have fewer screen prints that can be used in multiple colorways. So some fabric manufacturers, like Clothworks, for example, you will see the same print in 3 different colors in every single line. And that's just how they do it. It's how they keep costs down. And a lot of manufacturers use that. And that's why you end up with a lot of really light prints. And sometimes we design around that in patterns like Vintage Revisited. And sometimes we have a lot of really bold prints that don't matter. And we're able to use something like All the Pretties.
Yeah, I noticed that specifically with your last stash in line Delilah. There was a lot of similar prints, but in different colorways.
And we definitely have quite a few patterns that keep that in mind, where you are able to segment it based on the color value in addition to the pattern that you like. Vintage Revisited is one of those where we have the lighter prints are in the center of it. And so that way you can easily use all the prints and then just have your mediums and your darks on the outside, because then you're not limited by what you choose for your background. Because here you would have to either go with something that was definitely not neutral. Like you would need some sort of a gray that was in between the white and the gray of here in order to make it work. Otherwise you're going to lose something of the block. But whereas like if you do it with Vintage Revisited and it's in the center, then you don't have to worry about that as much. And sometimes it doesn't matter. Like Subway, for example, there's a lot of light colored prints in there, but we used a really bright white. And so everything stood out against that. So you can still get away with it. It's just gonna be a lower value quilt like this one is, where there's parts that are really graphic and there are parts that kind of fade back to the side. Any of them can be done. Just some of them, like Ladies Chain and All the Pretties, won't look the same as they do in the original if you go with it this one, because it's not going to be as poppy for the color. So you've got lots of options. This one is large. It's going to show off your fabric really well. There is a fair amount of leftovers on this one because of the way it's cut.
And that's one of my like mental hangups when it comes to quilting is I see this fabric and I really like it, and then I look at the patterns. It's like, man, I can't. Unless I fussy cut everything, which is going to be a big pain, how is the prints going to show? And having potential to show bigger prints really appeals to me, because if I want the foxes to display, I don't want to cut a fox's head off, because that's just going to...
Well, and the way it ends up working out is some fox will have their heads cut off.
Yeah.
And some will be perfectly positioned, even though you didn't mean it to.
Right.
And even like with All the Pretties, I think in this video, I talked about like strategically cutting. Like I didn't fussy cut any of this. But I did, like we were cutting like 2 different size, I think 3 different size strips from this. So I made sure to cut so that I would end up with a bird in the center and a peacock in the center. And so it wasn't fussy cutting, but I was kind of strategically deciding which strips I was going to cut first so that it would end up in a decent enough space. And that worked out a couple of times where we have peacocks where we needed to be, and this one we see a beautiful peacock tail instead. And this one, its head is completely cut off and we just see their butts. Like, they're not all gonna look out perfectly, but there'll be enough to where it's fine. And this is another one too where I like to show off lots of the fabric, because we have 3 different size squares in here. So like All the Pretties, like Garden Plot, it's gonna allow you to have some of them kind of shine. And you can fussy cut, you just need more fabric if you're gonna do that. Like we have a tutorial, we released my collection Garden Plot, where I showed specifically how to fussy cut the owls so that they would end up right in the middle of each one, because that's one where you don't want to have just the owl feet. You want the owls to be right in the center. So it's totally how much extra work are you willing to do? Do you understand what needs to be done to do the extra work? And have you gotten some extra fabric to allow for that? So that's kind of where that's at.
Okay.
But Subway is one where they're all going to be super skinny, so you're not going to, it's going to be where it's going to be.
Right.
And I think those are 2 inches high. So like your butterflies are going to look good in that no matter what. But like some of your fairies might get totally cut off because like this one is probably taller than 2 inches. So... these are things.
And that's just a hang up you have to get over if you're going to quilt.
You definitely do. And like, let's look at this one. And you know what? Any quilt shop that you look at, you can usually open these up and take a peek at it. Or I sometimes on the videos will talk about measurements slightly, so you can kind of get an eye on like how big some of these are going to be. But let's see. This one is going to end up being 3 inches finished, which is probably about the size of what that is. So depending on where you cut, And you can cut strategically too when you're cutting your original strips. And then, you know, you have a better chance of it ending up where you want it to be.
Keeping all that in mind, I mean, I like both grid work and vintage revisited probably best, but I mean, to do something a little different, I mean, I'd probably lean towards vintage revisited just to sort of change it up a little bit.
And I think that's a really good choice because it's still going to be within your skill level. It's strip piecing in squares and a couple rectangles, I think. But this way, you'll be able to put all of these prints, like we talked about, in those center areas and surround it with your medium and dark prints. All your blocks are going to stand out great, and you're not limited by your background choice. You don't have to do the cream or the white. You could do a tan or a gray, or even a lighter green would be fine too. It just really depends on what you want to pull out.
Does the background need to be the same shade, or do you want it as like you talk about a light green? You don't want it to be a forest green. You want it to be a lighter shaded green.
If you use the forest green, then you would need to sort of reverse your block. So you would want to have your lighter prints on the outside and your darker prints on the center. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. And that's something that people can do, but you kind of have to have the vision of how it's going to look and plan that accordingly. The easiest thing to do is to pick something that coordinates with some of the fabrics or colors that are in here. So like we have our orange fox, we have our gray foxes here, we have a little bit of teal here. And depending on what we choose, it's going to pull that out and make it come to the forefront more.
So if you're going to do a non-traditional background, I mean, you would probably want to do something that, I mean, if you want to do it in a green, maybe do it in that teal, or maybe in this lighter shade of green.
Exactly.
So you don't lose the dark forest green.
Exactly. You would lose that on your block edge otherwise. Another good thing to think of is, I know a lot of people are, like our finishing kits for Stash with Stephanie, sell a lot better whenever we have a white background. I've done hot pink for a background before, like with Cave, and it's awesome. It's great. But a lot of people default to that white because it's a safe choice. But if you have kids, pets, you know, significant others who might spill coffee on this, that's not always the best choice. I know we talked about your cat is orange.
Yeah.
So maybe orange to match the fox might be great. You'll never see any of the cat hair.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are bonuses to going outside the box a little bit and getting outside that safe choice.
It's all very, very interesting to be learning about on a daily basis. So.
All right. So it's been a minute since we filmed that video.
It has been.
Yes.
Like I said, full facial hair. And
I went gray, so you know a lot of things happened between then and now. But I think it turned out amazing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, I started it, and you know, first of all, I hate cutting, hate it. Just nervous, especially when you're dealing with a fabric line that, you know, you don't have any more of. And so there were definitely some times where I came up short a little bit. Luckily, I had enough fabric, like enough extra spares to be able to do it all. But, you know, so it was very much a learning process in terms of, you know, sewing the 1/4 inch seam. I could tell from start to finish my 1/4 inch seam got better and better. You know, and then there were definitely times where I'm like, I hate this, I don't want to do this anymore. But I'm also the type of person who won't quit. I'm not going to move on to another project where I've got one hanging back there. So I kept sticking with it. Got to know my seam ripper incredibly well.
I do want to say that your points are fantastic.
Well, that also, you know, thank you. That also came from, you know, much trial and error. I mean, doing the actual blocks wasn't that hard. I mean, in terms of matching up, you know, making sure that everything. It was when I started putting it all together when I ran into some real big issues because
Well, there were a few things you didn't know that you didn't know.
Like I didn't pin when I started doing the long
adding the sashing
and everything.
blocks.
So the first time when I did the top block, I sewed everything together and
it
everything was
did
haywire.
One of these.
It was too long one way, and it was definitely slanting down, and so I had to pick the entire thing out with seam, which was a pain in the butt. But once I learned that, I didn't have any issues the rest of the way. It was, you know, I just was able to do this, boom, 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 and so once I got it done, like I said, when I was doing the blocks, I was like, I still don't know how this is going to turn out.
Color-wise, though, I think it's fantastic.
But yes.
I mean, what we did, when I'm sure you remember, although it was a while ago, we went through and we decided what fabrics were going to go for each step, and we assigned it to it and then labeled it with address labels, just blank address labels.
Incredibly helpful.
And so that way we knew that these are our darker fabrics, and then this is going to go for dark and medium, this is going to be medium, and this is going to be light. And I think that really helped you because you were able to really just I mean, the block is successful in that you can see the block.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you have collections like this, and we talk about it, I believe, when we talked about this forever ago, is if you had any of these touching this background, you wouldn't see it at all. But now it stands out, and I know you really like those foxes, and you didn't like it when they got cut up a little bit.
I've learned that certain animals I'm going to have to either fussy cut or just not use the fabric, because when I first started cutting the fox prints, I killed a lot of foxes. I beheaded several and cut their tails off, and it was a massacre, and I felt really bad about it. I mean, this one right here, this poor little guy,
He's missing his top half.
It's just missing his top half. It's just his legs. But
Bobby gave me a lot of grief for murdering hummingbirds when I was strip piecing with some hummingbird fabric.
Yeah.
And then he went through the same process about a week later when you were doing these.
See, I really connect to the animals. I know they're just on fabric, but they each have a little story. I mean, this guy doesn't have an ear now. It's really sad. This guy just missing the tip of his tail, but he's pretty much intact. But it was fun. I mean,
well, and then you have ones like here where it's, you didn't fussy cut this, but it's perfectly centered. So you have those little happy little accidents, and then you have our guy where you just see his butt.
Poor little guy.
And that's just how it is when you strip piece.
And so I learned also, because the next quilt I'm going to do is going to be a present for friends of mine who are expecting, which we did fussy cut, but I had you and Courtney fussy cut it for me.
We had to use the we liberally here.
Yes, because I was not, because we're doing it with Tula Pink's Everglow, and if you've seen that fabric, obviously it's got a lot of really good big animal prints. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to fussy cut that. I didn't want anything to cut with that.
Just wait until I show you how to line up the ruler with the stripes to make sure those are square.
Yeah, well, that's
a little easier.
At least the animals are safe in that one. But no, it was fun. It was frustrating a lot of times.
I think that's any craft in general when you're learning.
But once I had gotten the blocks done, once I started laying it out, I was like, okay. Then I got excited again. It was it's doing a block, and obviously you know this. You're doing, I think I did 18 blocks in this, and it does get tedious. Mm-hmm. You're doing the same thing, pinning.
Well, and this is why we told you to chain piece, because it goes a little faster.
Yeah, and a lot of times I understand why you said that, but I also wanted it to be a certain way. Like I didn't want to have, if I could avoid it,
the same.
Have this print next to more prints of that, and I've got a couple, and it's just I was trying to maintain some control over where everything ended up in this one.
For sure.
And so, but so it took me a long time because I had to pin everything and then do it and then repin, and so.
For me, it was really fun to watch your progression, because you started off where you would not even sew a strip together, a set of strips, unless I was there. And then by the end, you just grabbed a sewing machine and took it home with you for the weekend and came back with a finished quilt. So it was like really... I feel like you've really come into your own on it.
It's fun. Am I ready to do half square triangles and diamonds? Absolutely not.
It is on your bucket list.
Even though I've got a couple of quilts that are going to require those, but
we're going to have some Saturday crafting events again.
But at this point, I definitely feel comfortable in a lot of the techniques that are required to do quilting. So I just need to get the patience part of it down.
Well,
I want to be able to...
I have 2 children and 3 dogs, so that has really helped hone my patience. You have 1 cat.
Yeah. But
so,
I'm jealous of you.
It's
you
a
can get a quilt done start to finish in a week, and I want to be able to do that I just want to be able to sit down and get a quilt done in 2 days. Be done with it.
I mean, if you had a free weekend and you had an easy enough pattern, it's doable.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I don't have very many easy patterns.
You got pretty excited about
because your patterns are incredible, but they're
involved. Sometimes.
I wouldn't say they're difficult, not necessarily difficult, but they're
you
involved.
are drawn to the ones that are more involved.
Yes, that's true.
That is, I think, the better way of putting it.
Yes.
However, your baby quilt is going to go fast.
I hope so, because I have this actual due date on that one.
You do. Although every quilter knows this, that baby cannot use that quilt until it's a year old anyway, except as a play mat. So you have a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, well,
it's okay.
So.
But it's fun to have, because then they can I took pictures of my daughter on the same quilt on the, week anniversary of her birth date. So every Thursday we took a picture on the quilt, and it was so fun to watch her grow in accordance to the scale of the quilt.
And that's what I want to try and do. So.
Yeah, for sure.
But no, so a lot of fun. This pattern is a lot of fun. Like I said, I think probably with every pattern, you definitely get a point where it's a little tedious, but it is a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's
for me too. The ones that I create.
Yeah.
At one point, there's always a point where I'm like, I would like to be done with this now.
And it's a good pattern. It is a good pattern for beginners. I mean, again, I'm a beginner. I hadn't done...
This is basically your first actual project.
Yeah. And yeah, it took me a long time, but that was also because I was only doing it maybe for an hour or two at a time after work.
Well, and then we would have like Friday afternoons
Yeah.
to sew not every Friday,
But it wasn't like I was, I sat down for, a week straight and was able to do it for like a week straight. But it was fun. It was really fun to see it come together. I think a lot of people would enjoy this one. So Vintage Revisited, in case you'd forgotten what the pattern was called.
Very good. Well, like I said, the whole purpose of it was to show how to pick a pattern that, enhances your fabric, where your fabric is allowed to shine. You did a great job with this one. I think labeling all of that to make sure everything ended up in the right spot was really helpful. But I mean, it succeeded. You fulfilled the mission, and you got your dark, your medium, and then your lights are fully separated from your background. You've got a successful quilt lock, and it's going to be beautiful.
Organization, organization, organization.
Yes.
That is the key.
That is very key, because then if you do set it down and you have to pick it up later, you kind of know where you're at.
Yeah.
I write myself notes too sometimes.
So.
But, all right. Well, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.
Happy quilting.
Happy quilting.